Emily Carter's wedding day was meant to be the happiest moment of her life, until her best friend, Sophie Lane, turned that happiness into horror. The morning sun rose gently over the peaceful town of Maplewood, casting a golden glow across the rooftops and church spires. Birds chirped softly, and a light breeze carried the scent of blooming roses from the nearby gardens. Inside a cozy, decorated room, Emily Carter sat before a mirror, her reflection glowing with nervous excitement. Today was her wedding day, the day she had dreamed of since childhood. At 26, Emily had everything she ever wanted: a loving family, a stable career as a teacher, and a man who adored her more than anything, Daniel Reeves. They had met 3 years earlier at a community charity event and had been inseparable ever since. Everyone admired their bond, calling them the perfect couple. Their love story was pure and joyful, something people wished they had in their own lives. Helping her that morning was her lifelong best friend, Sophie Lane, the maid of honor. Sophie smiled as she adjusted Emily's veil, offering compliments that sounded sincere, though her eyes seemed distant. To Emily, Sophie was more than a friend. She was family, someone she trusted with every secret. Neighbors dropped by with flowers, photographers clicked away, and Emily's mother wiped away tears of happiness. The air was full of laughter, blessings, and excitement. Emily's heart raced as she imagined walking down the aisle toward Daniel. Everything was perfect, or so it seemed. Outside, Sophie stood by the window, staring at Daniel arriving with his best man. Her heart tightened. No one noticed the look in her eyes, a flicker of pain mixed with something darker. To everyone else, it was a day of joy. But for Sophie, it marked the beginning of a deadly secret that would shatter their world forever. Before Emily and Daniel ever met, Sophie Lane had already fallen for him. It happened years ago in college when Daniel was a guest speaker at a design workshop. Sophie, then a student in the same program, admired his confidence, his calm voice, and the way he treated everyone with respect. He became her silent obsession, someone she thought destiny had written for her. But destiny had other plans. Months later, Sophie introduced Daniel to her close friend Emily during a charity event, thinking nothing of it. What began as a polite friendship between the two quickly turned into late-night conversations, shared laughter, and growing affection. Within weeks, Daniel was calling Emily instead of Sophie. The moment Sophie realized what was happening, something inside her changed. She told herself she was happy for them, forcing a smile whenever Emily spoke about Daniel. She helped plan their dates, offered advice, and listened to Emily's excitement after every meeting. On the outside, she was the supportive best friend, but inside, jealousy quietly grew roots. Each time Emily mentioned Daniel's name, Sophie's chest tightened a little more. Years passed, and Sophie never confessed her feelings to anyone. She buried them beneath fake smiles and polite congratulations when Daniel proposed. Yet at night, when she was alone, her thoughts turned dark. She would scroll through their photos, imagining herself in Emily's place, wearing the ring, saying the vows, being the one Daniel loved. The more she tried to move on, the deeper her obsession became. It wasn't just love anymore, it was possession. Daniel had become her idea of perfection, and Emily, once her sisterly friend, had become the thief who stole her only dream. A storm was forming quietly inside Sophie's heart, and soon it would break. As the wedding day drew closer, excitement filled the air. Emily wanted everything to be perfect: the flowers, the music, the dress, and the vows. Naturally, she trusted Sophie to handle most of it. For years, Sophie had been her go-to person for advice, the friend who knew her better than anyone. Together, they spent hours flipping through bridal magazines, visiting boutiques, and tasting cakes. To everyone, it looked like a beautiful display of friendship. But behind Sophie's smile, jealousy festered like a hidden wound. Sophie took charge of every detail, from the elegant white roses that would line the aisle to the pearl decorations on the reception tables. She even suggested the venue, the same garden where Daniel had once complimented her years ago, a memory she never forgot. Every decision reminded her of what could have been if things had gone differently. Emily, glowing with gratitude, often hugged Sophie and said she couldn't have done it without her. Each time, those words cut deep. Sophie would smile and whisper, "Anything for you." But in her heart, it meant something darker: anything, even this. At the dress fitting, Emily looked radiant in white satin and lace. The sight made Sophie's chest tighten. She adjusted the veil with shaking hands, pretending it was from excitement. In truth, it was rage barely contained. Guests and family praised Sophie for her dedication, calling her the perfect maid of honor. She accepted the compliments quietly, knowing no one saw the truth. What they believed was devotion was actually control. Sophie wasn't just helping with a wedding. She was building the stage for the perfect tragedy. Each flower, each ribbon, each smile brought her one step closer to the moment she had unknowingly been planning all along. 2 weeks before the wedding, something in Sophie Lane began to unravel. The cheerful, organized maid of honor everyone admired slowly became distant. She stopped joining group chats about decorations, ignored Emily's calls, and often disappeared for hours. When Emily asked if everything was fine, Sophie brushed it off, blaming stress. But those who saw her noticed the difference. Her once bright smile had turned forced, her eyes darker and more restless. At night, Sophie would drive around town aimlessly, her thoughts tangled in jealousy and heartbreak. She replayed every moment Emily and Daniel shared, the proposal, the laughter, the way Daniel looked at Emily. In Sophie's mind, those images weren't memories anymore. They were proof of betrayal. One rainy evening, she parked near an old pawn shop on the edge of Maplewood. The clerk remembered her later, a quiet woman wearing a trench coat, hands trembling as she placed cash on the counter. She bought a small silver handgun, legally registered but hidden under a false story of self-protection. She left the shop quickly, clutching the brown paper bag as though it contained her salvation. At home, Sophie unwrapped it slowly. The cold metal reflected her face, pale, tired, and hollow. She locked it in her dresser drawer and stared at it for minutes, feeling a strange calm settle over her. In the days that followed, she appeared normal again, joining Emily for final fittings and rehearsals. But her laughter was empty now. Beneath her polished exterior, she had crossed a line she could never return from. No one, not even Emily, suspected that Sophie had quietly chosen her fate and sealed her best friends. The evening before the wedding was filled with joy and celebration. Emily's family hosted a small dinner at their home, inviting close friends and relatives. Laughter echoed through the house as everyone toasted to the couple's future. Emily looked radiant, her face glowing with happiness, while Sophie sat beside her, smiling faintly, lost in her thoughts. To everyone else, Sophie looked calm, even proud. But inside, her emotions were spinning out of control. Every compliment about how perfect Emily and Daniel were together felt like a stab to her chest. She excused herself often, pretending to take phone calls, when in reality, she was standing outside in the cold, trying to steady her shaking hands. That night, Emily and Sophie spent their final moments together as best friends. Emily was too excited to sleep, pacing her childhood bedroom, talking about her future with Daniel. Sophie sat quietly on the edge of the bed, nodding and smiling, her mind drifting somewhere far darker. Before leaving, Sophie hugged Emily tightly. To Emily, it was a gesture of love and support. To Sophie, it was a silent goodbye. As she drove home, the city lights blurred through her tears. She knew there was no turning back. The plan had already taken shape in her mind. At 11:47 p.m., Emily received a text from Sophie. "Can't wait to see you walk down the aisle." She smiled at the message, feeling grateful for such a loyal friend. Then she placed her phone aside and drifted to sleep, dreaming of the happiest day of her life. Sophie, meanwhile, sat awake in darkness, staring at the silver gun on her table, whispering to herself that by tomorrow, everything would finally be right. The morning of the wedding arrived bright and beautiful, as if the world itself was celebrating Emily Carter and Daniel Reeves. The church was decorated with white roses and gold ribbons, the scent of fresh flowers filling the air. Guests began to arrive early, dressed in their finest clothes, whispering about how beautiful the day was and how perfect the couple looked together. Inside the bridal suite, Emily sat surrounded by her bridesmaids. Her makeup artist added the final touches while her mother adjusted her veil with trembling hands. Emily couldn't stop smiling. She felt like the luckiest woman alive. Beside her, Sophie Lane, the maid of honor, stood quietly, holding the bouquet. Her expression was calm but pale, her hands trembling ever so slightly. When the music began, everyone rose from their seats. The church doors opened, and Emily stepped inside, glowing in her white gown. As she walked down the aisle, all eyes turned to her, including Sophie's. She watched Daniel's face light up with admiration and love, a look Sophie had longed for but never received. The moment felt endless, painful, and surreal. At the altar, Emily took Daniel's hands, smiling through tears as they exchanged vows. The priest's voice echoed through the hall, speaking of love, trust, and eternal union. Sophie stood just a few steps behind them, clutching the bouquet so tightly that her knuckles turned white. When the ceremony ended, applause filled the church. Cameras flashed, and the couple kissed to the sound of cheers. Sophie smiled for the pictures, but her eyes were empty. What everyone saw as joy was, in truth, the quiet breaking of a heart that had finally reached its limit. The celebration had begun, and so had Sophie's silent descent into darkness. As the ceremony ended, laughter and applause echoed through the church. Guests lined up outside, tossing petals into the air as Emily and Daniel exited hand in hand. Cameras flashed, music played, and the bride's happiness seemed to light up every corner. Yet, among the sea of smiling faces, Sophie Lane stood slightly apart, her expression unreadable. While others followed the newlyweds to the reception hall, Sophie quietly slipped away to the parking lot. Her heels clicked against the pavement as she walked to her car, her heartbeat pounding louder with every step. She opened the glove compartment and stared at the small silver gun resting inside. For a long moment, she just looked at it, as if deciding whether to pick it up or leave it behind forever. But jealousy whispered louder than reason. She had convinced herself that Emily had stolen her life. The love, the attention, the future that should have been hers. Each laugh Emily shared with Daniel twisted like a knife in Sophie's chest. The voices in her head no longer argued. They agreed. This was the only way to make the pain stop. After several minutes, Sophie closed the compartment and locked the car. She took a deep breath, forcing her features back into calmness. Then she walked back toward the reception, fixing her dress and smile. No one noticed her brief absence. To the guests, she was just the loyal maid of honor returning from a quick break. But inside Sophie's mind, a quiet decision had been made, one that would turn a day of joy into a night of horror. The perfect wedding was about to take a devastating turn that no one could have imagined. The reception hall shimmered with golden lights and laughter. Tables overflowed with food, the scent of fresh roses lingered in the air, and music filled the space with warmth. Guests congratulated the newlyweds, snapping photos as Emily and Daniel took to the dance floor for their first dance. Their eyes met, full of love and promises for a future together. It was a moment everyone admired, everyone except Sophie Lane, who watched silently from her seat. To the crowd, Sophie looked proud, even joyful. She clapped and smiled at the couple's dance, raising her glass like everyone else. But inside, her emotions swirled between heartbreak and rage. Every time Daniel looked at Emily with tenderness, Sophie's stomach tightened. The life she had dreamed of, the one she believed was meant to be hers, was playing out right in front of her, belonging to someone else. When it came time for speeches, Sophie stood up. The microphone trembled slightly in her hand, but her voice was steady. She delivered a touching toast, calling Emily her sister for life, and saying Daniel was the best thing that ever happened to her best friend. Guests cheered and wiped away tears. It was the kind of moment people would later describe as beautiful. But behind that smile, Sophie's thoughts were dark. She had already made up her mind, and every passing minute pushed her closer to it. As the music played and laughter continued, Sophie quietly excused herself again, saying she needed a moment. No one paid attention as she slipped away, not realizing that their night of celebration was about to turn into a nightmare they would never forget. The night had settled softly over Maplewood as the wedding celebration reached its peak. The band played upbeat tunes, guests danced under twinkling lights, and Emily's laughter rang clear above the crowd. She was glowing, the image of happiness. But after hours of smiling for cameras and greeting guests, she excused herself to the bridal suite upstairs to fix her makeup and take a moment of quiet. Unseen by anyone, Sophie Lane followed her. She moved calmly, her expression unreadable. Surveillance footage would later show her walking down the hallway at exactly 7:42 p.m., holding her small clutch close to her chest. Inside it, hidden beneath a compact mirror and lipstick, was the cold silver gun. Emily stood before the mirror in her white gown, adjusting her veil and smiling faintly at her reflection. For her, it was a private moment of peace. For Sophie, it was the final act of a plan she had convinced herself was justice. She entered the room quietly, closed the door behind her, and stood there for a long moment, the air between them heavy with unspoken emotions. No one downstairs heard anything unusual. The music was loud, laughter constant. At 7:49 p.m., the security camera showed Sophie leaving the suite. Her face looked calm, her steps steady. In her hand, the clutch was gone. A few minutes later, the sound of a single muffled gunshot echoed faintly through the hall. No one paid attention, assuming it was part of the celebration. But upstairs, Emily lay motionless on the floor, her white dress stained red, her crown of flowers fallen beside her. The bride who had just promised forever had only minutes left of her story. At first, no one noticed that Emily Carter hadn't returned to the reception. The music played, and guests continued to dance, believing she was simply changing or resting. But when 10, then 15 minutes passed, one of the bridesmaids, Lena, decided to check on her. She climbed the grand staircase, still smiling, unaware of what she was about to see. The bridal suite door was slightly ajar. Lena knocked softly and called Emily's name. There was no answer. Pushing the door open, she froze. The scene before her didn't seem real. Emily was lying on the floor in her wedding dress, motionless, her skin pale, her bouquet scattered beside her. A faint trail of blood stained the white carpet, spreading beneath her like a cruel shadow. Lena screamed. Her voice echoed through the hall, cutting through the music downstairs. Within moments, guests rushed toward the staircase, confusion spreading like wildfire. Daniel was the first to reach the room. The moment he saw Emily, he fell to his knees, shaking her shoulders, begging her to wake up. But her eyes remained closed, her lips still curved faintly, as if frozen mid-smile. The room was chaos, cries, gasps, and disbelief. Someone called the police, others tried to help, though it was already too late. Among the crowd, Sophie Lane stood quietly near the doorway, her face blank, her hands folded tightly together. She didn't cry, didn't move, only watched as paramedics entered and declared Emily dead. In the corner, a single bullet casing gleamed under the vanity lights. The pistol was nowhere to be found. The fairy tale wedding had become a crime scene, and within minutes, every guest in Maplewood knew that something terrible had happened to the perfect bride. The moment the paramedics pronounced Emily Carter dead, chaos erupted inside the reception hall. Guests screamed, some fainted, others broke down crying. The once beautiful venue, decorated with flowers and golden lights, now felt like a nightmare. The band stopped playing, and the laughter that had filled the evening turned into sobs and whispers of disbelief. Daniel Reeves was inconsolable. He clung to Emily's body, refusing to let go until police gently pulled him away. His tuxedo was stained with her blood, his face blank with shock. No one could comprehend how a wedding, a celebration of love, had turned into a tragedy within minutes. The police quickly sealed off the building, treating it as an active crime scene. Officers moved through the crowd, asking guests to remain calm. Panic spread as people realized the killer might still be among them. The doors were locked. No one was allowed to leave. Meanwhile, Sophie Lane stood near the back of the room, comforting Daniel's mother. Her voice was soft, her face expressionless. She wiped a tear from her cheek, though it wasn't clear whether it was real or practiced. When questioned by police, she said she had last seen Emily heading to the suite to freshen up, a believable story that drew no suspicion at first. As detectives began collecting statements, whispers filled the air. Some thought it was an accident, others suspected a jealous ex. But there were no signs of forced entry or struggle. Someone at that wedding had pulled the trigger. No one imagined it could be Sophie, the loyal best friend, the smiling maid of honor, standing quietly among them, hiding the secret that would soon unravel everything. The investigation began immediately. The police sealed off the venue and collected every piece of evidence from the bridal suite. Crime scene technicians photographed the blood-stained carpet, the scattered flowers, and the faint powder burn on Emily's gown. A single bullet casing was found near the mirror, clear proof that the shot had been fired at close range. But the murder weapon was missing. Detectives interviewed every guest, beginning with those closest to the bride. Sophie Lane, as the maid of honor, was questioned early. She appeared calm, composed, and helpful. She told officers she had been downstairs helping staff arrange the gift table during the time of the shooting. Her voice didn't shake once, and her story sounded rehearsed. But something about her didn't sit right with Detective Harris, the lead investigator. He noticed faint traces of what looked like glittering dust on Sophie's hands, later confirmed to be gunpowder residue. When confronted, she claimed it came from sparklers used during the couple's entrance. It was a clever excuse, but not convincing enough. That night, police reviewed the reception hall's surveillance footage. At 7:42 p.m., Sophie was seen walking toward the upstairs corridor. At 7:49, she returned, expressionless, and without the clutch she had been carrying earlier. The camera angle didn't capture what happened inside the suite, but it was enough to raise serious suspicion. The next morning, officers searched Sophie's car. Hidden in the trunk, beneath a pile of floral decorations, was a small silver handgun, the same one purchased from the pawn shop 2 weeks earlier. Ballistic tests confirmed the bullet found in Emily's body was fired from that weapon. The image of the perfect maid of honor shattered instantly. Sophie Lane was no longer a grieving friend. She was now the prime suspect in her best friend's murder. After her arrest, Sophie Lane maintained her innocence. She claimed the gun in her car had been planted and that she had no reason to harm her best friend. Her calmness in custody unsettled even the detectives. But as investigators dug deeper, the mask she had worn for years began to crumble. In her apartment, police discovered a small leather-bound journal hidden inside a drawer. What they found inside told a chilling story, one of jealousy, obsession, and slow descent into darkness. The entries began innocently, with Sophie writing about her admiration for Daniel. But as time passed, her tone shifted. Her words became possessive, angry, and filled with bitterness toward Emily. In one entry, dated 3 months before the wedding, Sophie wrote, "She doesn't deserve him. I saw him first. She takes everything from me and calls it friendship." Another, written a week before the wedding, read, "When she walks down that aisle, I'll lose everything. Maybe the only way to stop the pain is to stop her." These words painted a clear picture of premeditation. Combined with surveillance footage, gun records, and residue evidence, the case against Sophie became undeniable. When detectives confronted her with the journal, her composure finally cracked. She wept uncontrollably, admitting she had been consumed by envy. According to her confession, she never planned to kill Emily that day, only to confront her, to make her afraid. But when Emily smiled, speaking kindly as always, Sophie's anger took over. She claimed everything after that was a blur, the flash, the sound, and then silence. The truth was out. Sophie's hidden obsession had destroyed not only her best friend's life, but also her own. The bond once built on trust had turned into a deadly betrayal born from love twisted into madness. The murder trial of Sophie Lane became the most talked-about case in Maplewood's history. Reporters filled the courtroom, cameras flashed, and the once-beloved maid of honor sat silently at the defense table, wearing a plain gray suit instead of the bright dresses she was once known for. The woman who had once been admired for her loyalty now faced charges of first-degree murder. The prosecution built a powerful case. They presented the gun, the pawn shop receipt, the surveillance footage, and Sophie's own journal, each piece painting a haunting picture of obsession and betrayal. The prosecutor described how jealousy had festered in Sophie's heart for years, turning her affection into hatred, her friendship into deceit. When the journal entries were read aloud, the courtroom fell silent. Words of love and anger written in Sophie's handwriting echoed like confessions from a fractured soul. Emily's parents cried softly, unable to understand how someone their daughter trusted could harbor such darkness. The defense tried to argue that Sophie was mentally unstable, driven by emotional breakdown rather than intent. They pleaded for leniency, claiming she acted in a sudden fit of passion. But the evidence was overwhelming. The act had been deliberate, not impulsive. Daniel Reeves testified last. His voice broke as he described how Emily had loved Sophie like a sister, never suspecting the envy behind her smile. His statement moved even the judge. After 3 hours of deliberation, The jury returned with a verdict, guilty of first-degree murder. Gasps filled the courtroom. Sophie lowered her head as the judge announced her sentence. Life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The Golden Girl's wedding had ended in death, and the best friend who promised to stand beside her forever would now spend her forever behind bars. Months after the trial, the once celebrated town of Maplewood remained haunted by the tragedy. The church that had echoed with laughter on Emily's wedding day now stood as a silent reminder of what had been lost. Every time people passed the Grand Hall, they whispered the same words, the wedding that ended in death. Daniel Reeves sold their home and left town. He couldn't bear the memories, the laughter that turned to screams, the love that ended in blood. Friends said he became quiet and distant, spending most of his time traveling, trying to find peace somewhere far from where everything fell apart. Emily's parents visited her grave often, leaving white roses, her favorite, and praying that her soul had found the peace denied to her on earth. Sophie Lane began her life sentence in a state prison, her days spent in silence and regret. She refused interviews, avoided contact with the outside world, and never applied for appeal. Inside her cell, she was often seen writing in notebooks, though no one knew what she wrote. Some believed she was documenting her guilt. Others thought she was trying to rewrite her story in her mind, a version where jealousy hadn't consumed her. Emily's grave became a place of mourning not just for family, but for strangers who left flowers and notes about friendship, trust, and betrayal. Her story became a chilling reminder that sometimes the most dangerous enemies are not strangers, but the ones who stand closest to us, smiling, pretending to love us, while quietly wishing to take everything we have. The wedding meant to unite hearts had instead exposed the darkest corners of one, leaving behind a tragedy Maplewood would never forget.